Hello and welcome. We're in my wormery, and it's been 6 days since the last time we visited with my bins. And at that time, we had fed those 4 bins over on the right. Those are my regular composting bins. And today we're going to do the same. We're going to visit those today and feed them. But we're also going to be checking in on my finishing bins. And when I refer to finishing bins, I'm talking about tubs that are basically holding material that I consider as finished vermicompost, but I'm also attempting to bait out any straggler worms that made their way into that material after the harvesting. And I'm also trying to bait out any newly hatched worms. Newly hatched worms that might have just emerged from their cocoons during the time that this material's been in the bin. The material's been in the bin for 20 days now. So the material was left for 10 days initially to rest, just sitting in the bins with nothing. And then on day 10, I had set up bait boxes with food and bedding and other material intended to draw the worms out of the surrounding material into the bait boxes. And now after 10 days, we're going to be checking in on them to see how they're coming along and potentially adding some additional food if it's needed to make sure that there's an ample supply in there to keep it interesting so that it continues to become a draw for the worms. I'm going to be running upstairs to the refrigerator to get some food out of the freezer and some coffee and some other stuff, and then we'll be back to this in a minute. So I'll be right back and we'll continue with this. Okay, so now I've returned and I've got my box of traditional spent coffee grinds and a fairly massive bag full of all kinds of vegetables and fruit scraps from the kitchen. Wondering if I'm going to be able to use it all today, but we'll see. We'll see how much of it we can cram into these bins to feed these guys. So if you look at this food, look at this watermelon. There is a lot of good watermelon on this rind, so this is going to be a real treat for them. There's some cantaloupe rinds in here as well, some potato peelings, some lettuce, banana peels, a whole assortment of delicious foods for them, so they're going to really enjoy this. So as we've seen in the past, there do appear to be a couple little sprouts popping out here and there, but not nearly as many as we've seen in the past. This bin is really nice in terms of the moisture level. I've been covering up with 2 sheets of cardboard. In the past, I believe I've only used one to cover up the newspaper that is normally resting right on top of the compost. And that second sheet of cardboard seems to be doing a great deal. So here we have the previous feeding zone right down the middle of the bin. This is a 20-day-old bin, and I believe this is still just the second feeding. Here's a piece of material that felt like plastic initially because it just was so tough, but it's getting soft. It even feels like it's about to crack just from me bending it in half. So in the past, when I found material like this, I had simply removed it thinking that it was plastic. So this was really a test to put this back into the bin to see what happens given a little bit more time. And I think that I've proven that it's not plastic. It is in fact some sort of organic material that will break down in time. So some of these larger pieces of food from the previous feeding, corn. Here's another piece. We'll put those back down into the feeding zone once we're finished loading the fresh batch of food in. So I think before plopping in a nice generous feeding, I am going to go ahead and lay down a fresh layer of leaves here on the bottom. And that will complement what's here already, which is some cardboard bedding that already exists down here. It's a nice generous amount. And on top of that, here's a nice big hunk of melon. Face it up. Put 2 pieces side by side. Put a real generous piece and a slightly smaller piece side by side. Throw in some leafy greens to go along with that, as well as a couple pieces of cantaloupe. They're going to really enjoy that. And some of my traditional used coffee grinds. since I made a whole batch of grit recently, I'm going to also go ahead and include grit again, which I don't do as often as I should, I believe. Continue to improve by doing slightly better things the next time than I did the previous time. So we're going to start moving this stuff back towards the center. At the same time, I'm just using this as a chance to sort of fluff things up on this outer edge that I didn't really disturb much previously. I'll do the same here, as I'll just kind of bring in all this material from the outer edge and then toss what's on top out over the feeding zone, and then kind of break up what's here to spread it about. The material all the way through everywhere has got this really nice moist consistency to it, right where we want it to be. And that's an improvement over my bins from the past. In the past, people have always commented how they think that my material seems a bit dry. And I believe that they were probably right. So it's only beneficial to have a slightly more damp environment for the worms. It just, aids in their breathing, and it's going to encourage them to reproduce and propagate. So I think what we've got here looks pretty nice. I like what I'm seeing here. All right. So here's just some of that sprouted stuff we're going to put back in here as food now. Good. And we'll move over to get the next bin started. So like I do often, I am sort of maintaining these two bins in a parallel fashion. So they were both launched on the same day. They were both launched in a very similar fashion. The only difference, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this bin right here, last time we checked in on it, appeared to have a larger number of worms and appeared to be burning through its food supply more quickly. And I believe that was attestable to the fact that I'm not certain, but I think I had launched this bin with a greater number of worms in the beginning. Okay. Things look pretty good in here. Very nice. So we're going to give this one similar treatment to the other one. Just going to fluff up some of the cardboard here on the bottom, whatever little bit we find. There's not much. We're going to get some leaves. Once again, we give it a nice abundant amount of leaves here. We'll start placing in some delicious food items for them. Get this old food back down in here as well. We can start covering up. Here too, I'm really noticing nice moisture out here on the outer edges. And I think that is also, just like on the other bin, attestable to that extra layer of covering I've been using, that extra layer of cardboard to keep the moisture within the bin from evaporating out. So that seems like a big win here. I think it's a huge improvement over what I've seen in the past. So I'm glad to see that. Here, while we're at it, we're also just kind of aerating stuff a little bit since we have an opportunity to do so. Kind of run my fingers a little bit through here, a little chance to put some pockets of air down in there for them. And I think we're going to be good to go. All right. definitely like what I'm seeing here. So these are my two oldest bins. They're coming along great. I give both of them high marks. So we'll get these back on the shelf, and we'll put the next two bins out here on the table. Those bins are a little bit older. They're a little bit more mature, a little bit further along. So we'll see in a moment how those are coming along. Let's get these babies covered up. Okay, so next up we have two bins here. These two are not being managed exactly the same, unlike the previous two that we just saw. These bins have a little bit of an age difference. This one is from March 27th. So this one is, I believe, 57 days old. And the next bin we're going to do is from February 26th. So that one, I believe, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 86 days old. So I just wanted to point that out before we start. On these, you're going to notice the feeding zones were not in the middle, but they were off on the edge. So I've initiated what's referred to as a horizontal feeding pattern on this bin. And maybe not so much because of the age, but more because of the nice progress that this bin was making, that I made the decision to convert this bin as well as the other bin to a horizontal migration pattern. So we're going to push this material back a little bit to expose the feeding zone here. So we can add a little bit more food to it. Very densely populated. I'm feeling little chunks of food here and there. But like I mentioned earlier, it was only 50 days old, this bin, 50 or so days old last week when I fed. And even though normally I don't start setting up a horizontal migration so quickly at such a young age for the bin, this bin was just really leaps and bounds ahead of any other bin you would normally see at this age. And as I look through the feeding zone here, I could find some scraps of cardboard and bedding material. However, I don't see many signs of the actual food items that were added to this bin last time. I mean, maybe I spoke too soon. I think this might still be cardboard bedding, so yeah. This is cardboard bedding. We added a whole bunch of cardboard bedding to this bin down at the bottom last time. But that's all I'm seeing. I don't really see any signs of the actual food that was placed on top of that bedding at that time. So this bin is just really, really chugging along quick. It's really making quick work of the food that gets added. So, wow, look at that. Must have been some real savory portion of food right there, because they're really congregating in this space right here. Whatever that food was, I can't tell because it's just totally gone at this point. But yeah, that's really good sign. Just go ahead and do what I did in the previous bin. Is I'm just going to throw some leaves down here to sort of bolster the bedding material before I add the food. Want to let this bin sort of wind down, start making its way to the finish line sooner rather than later. And we'll do the same. We'll put in a couple nice chunks of melon, watermelon and cantaloupe melon, some potato peelings, a banana peel, and a handful of some green stuff too. Okay, very nice. A little bit of coffee. A little bit of coffee on top of that. And more grit in the form of eggshells. So I really like what I'm seeing here. This is very encouraging. It's amazing how well this bin is progressing. It's just burning right through any food I put into it. So I'm quite impressed with how this one's proceeding. So I just wanted to do the same over here on this other opposite edge of where the feeding zone is, just to sort of check it out, jostle it up a little bit, see how things are progressing. And then I'll just go ahead and cover up It's really awesome. Just interesting to see how a bin that's, you know, maybe a month younger than the next bin that's been around longer appears to be almost overtaking the older bin. It's really very active, very healthy bin, doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Much more efficiently than any other bins I've seen in the past. Can't wait to see how this bin's coming along next time we check in on it. Okay, now this bin's in that 86-day-old age range, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And into this bin we had placed a fair amount of leaves, it seems, here to cover up the feeding zone. So rather than adding fresh leaves, I'm just going to grab these leaves and put them off to the side and use them as bedding. That's it. We're going to use these leaves as bedding for when we set up the feeding zone this go around, instead of using it as cover. This is the cork. This is the cork that we've been tracking the progress of. Cork, I don't know, cork just doesn't seem to get eaten up the way other organic matter does, even though it is just wood. But it's not really making much progress. I'm not sure how much longer it's going to stay in our bins because it just doesn't seem to be getting eaten. Let's start peeling back this feeding zone to see how things are progressing here. Okay, I can feel all kinds of things in here, and I believe this is the bin where we had placed in a bunch of the old chunks of mango. Yep, here it is. There's one old mango seed, another old mango seed. The idea that we entertained last time was to, at some point, maybe start thinking about removing all these mango seeds. This will definitely have to be placed into another active bin that's got some more time left. So we'll have to tend to that at some future time. All right, so down here too, we've got some bedding materials such as cardboard and some more leaves. I think we'll just go ahead and spread this cardboard around a little bit. A bunch of worms down here. Must be working the food that we gave them last time. I don't see anything other than these mangoes, so whatever food was added last time has probably been depleted at this point. And that might be the reason that the mango seeds are being neglected, because there's always other easier to eat food being added. So like I said earlier, I'm going to take these leaves this time. I'm just going to scatter them at the bottom here. Then we're going to add some food, but what we're going to do first is we're just going to plop in all these old mango seeds again, as well as the cork. For now, keep it in action, and then we'll add the new food items. There's a bunch of potato I couldn't really break apart earlier, but now it's finally thawing out enough that I can separate it. So maybe this bin, we'll just get one piece of melon. I'll save this last piece of melon in case we need it for the bait boxes on the other finishing tubs. They did make their way through whatever food had been added previously, so just want to keep adding, keep it going for them. All right. Got to admit though, for being my oldest bin, I would like it to be a little bit further along. So if I can remember, maybe the next go around we'll start with this bin, and maybe what we'll do is maybe we'll start plucking out some of those larger food bits to give this bin a chance to really start making its way to the finish line without any large chunks of uncomposted food lingering within the bin. So it's all good. All right, let's get this bin covered up, and we'll put these two back up on the shelf, and we're going to get those finishing tubs out here and take a peek at those bait boxes before we wrap up for the day. Alrighty, let's cover up. Okay, so before I proceed, I am going to take this piece of melon here, watermelon, and I'm going to hack it up into to 3 pieces, because the bait boxes that I have, I'm fairly sure that after this much time, hopefully, the material has settled down enough that there should be room in it for me to add more. I can only imagine watermelon is probably going to only help encourage the worms to make their way out of the compost and over into the bait boxes. So just wanted to take care of that before we get the boxes out here on the table. Okay, so this is the smallest of my 3 bait boxes, and it's got a slightly smaller box as well. So we're going to just take a little bit of a peek in here. It doesn't seem like the contents have really collapsed down, or maybe they have. I can feel that there is some space here within the bait box. I can already see that it's working in terms of baiting worms out. You know what we'll do? We're going to grab a quick tray just so we can dump out its contents. I've got this tray here. We can dump out the contents to see how things are progressing. It's really really compacted down on the bottom. You can see worms down there. Let's see if I can dislodge whatever it is that's down here. Figure out what's happening, try to get a good assessment. So now, there we go. It's mostly worms. It feels like leaves. If you look at the bottom of the box itself, more worms down there. So it seems to me like this is definitely making progress. It definitely seems to be working. So what I'm going to do is I am going to just try to empty it out as best I can. I think I'm just going to take the most delicious piece of the watermelon here, this red meaty piece of it. I'm only going to add that into the bait box as extra food, and maybe we'll toss this into one of the other bins, the remaining rinds. Because I just don't have that much space. I don't think there would be enough space for me to plop in that entire amount of material and the entire chunk of watermelon. So, and then what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and we'll put these guys right back in here. And we're going to hope that we can close the box back up. Might have to shove these guys back into position. I'm just going to take a peek at how the rest of the material is coming along. The rest of the material seems like it's pretty dry, kind of flaky. My hopes are that the bait boxes are doing their job and luring the worms out of the surrounding material. So to not find worms in the surrounding material is what we're after and hoping for. So it's going to take a few more peeks here and there. So every place I've looked so far, the material's been kind of dry and crumbly and no worms. So that's all very nice. That's exactly where we're hoping to take these bins. And since these bins are now 20 days old, you know, since it only takes about 3 to 4 weeks for a worm cocoon to hatch, it might be possible soon to bring closure to these finishing tubs. Because if any newly hatched worms do come out of their cocoons and make their way over into the bait boxes, there'll be nothing left for us to worry about in terms of worms to depopulate out of the material. So yeah, I think maybe that's the way we're going to handle it next go around. Maybe next go around we'll just wait. Maybe instead of reloading these boxes, we're just going to wait, and then assume at that point that any remaining cocoons throughout the material have hatched and any newly emerged baby worms have already made their way into the boxes, and treat the material in the surrounding tub as finished compost. Sounds like a good idea to me. Okay, so now these last two tubs, same deal. No difference really, except that they're larger. So let's do the same thing here. We'll just take a peek in the surrounding material to see if the evacuation is occurring as we've hoped. As I look inside this material, the material I can feel is a little bit more damp than the material in this tub. And that could be the reason that the worms are still feeling quite at home. So I do see worms throughout this material, and I do also see some larger chunks of food items, leaves and things of that nature. So, I mean, if they're comfortable because the material is nice and moist and they're able to find sufficient food in the surrounding material, then there's not a lot of incentive for them to try to make their way into the bait boxes. So, not seeing the type of results here as we had hoped for. Now on this end, the material is drier. I can feel it is certainly drier. And I can also see that there's worms here and there, but certainly fewer worms than what we saw on the other edge. So maybe the trick to doing these bins is to not have them covered up so efficiently, so nicely, so that the material can sort of start to dry out a little bit, making the material a little bit less comfortable for the worms to stay in, and giving them the reason to leave and make their way over into the bait boxes. So we'll just take a quick peek inside the bait box here and see how things are progressing. Let's get the tray over here, and we're just going to go ahead and dump it out. Let's see what we see. Alrighty. So we're seeing some worms and some leaf bedding. But I guess until the remaining surrounding material around the bait box becomes very unpalatable for them, they're just going to stay there, and they're not going to be compelled to come here into the bait box. So it might be necessary to make some adjustments here to try to optimize what we're after. So when I'm covering up this bin, I might think about covering it up in a way that allows more air to get in. Do what we did before, is we're just going to take the most savory piece of the melon and hack it away from the rind, and we're going to add only that to the bait box, since the bait box is intended to become sort of a irresistible space for them in terms of moisture and delicious food to go for. We'll just leave the rest of that rind for another bin. We'll just plop it in some other bin before we pack everything up here. And we'll just go ahead and reload everything back into the bait box. Cool. All right, let's get on to doing the last one. Okay. So here too, we've got a variety of different sprouts popping up. Turn them into worm food. Alrighty. So we'll do what we've done in the other two cases, is we're just going to pull this little guy out. See a fair number of worms cruising around right underneath the bait box. Now here, look at that. We got a large number of worms hanging out in this bait box. And it might be because there was a distinct difference between these two tubs. In one of the tubs, there was a larger effort made to sift out as many worms as possible, whereas on the other bin, probably this bin, very little effort was made to separate the worms from the compost. So I believe this is the bin that the compost was just dumped in with the knowledge that there's probably a huge number of worms cruising around in the material. and that was treated as just fine, and we're just going to deal with it. So that's the main reason for the major difference we're seeing here in terms of the quantity of worms present in this bait box, just because this material had a higher concentration of worms in it to begin with. So we're just going to separate the most savory, delicious part of the melon, drop it down into the bottom of the bait box, and then reload the contents. And we'll just go ahead and include this as worm food as well. There's a very distinct feel to this material. You can tell right away that it's loaded with worms just because of the way it feels, the way it reacts to being squeezed. So that was a pretty interesting session today. Might have gone a little bit longer than I had originally expected it to, but that's okay. I'm going to put this right back where it was and close it up. And all that remains now is to put everything back on the shelves and get things cleaned up here. So we're not going to stick around for that. This is already going to be a lengthy video the way it is, so hopefully nobody minds that that's the case. One last thing we could do here is what we've done in the other ones, is to take a peek within the material just to see how the evacuation of the worms from the material is progressing. Let's reach down deep to see what we see. This material is really fine. It's kind of moist, but not too heavily populated with worms as far as I could see, at least not on this edge. Take a peek over here too. Okay. I would say that on this edge we have much the same. Not bad. Very nice compost. Beautiful, rich material. And well, I mean, the time is coming close. Time is coming close, so I mean, it's almost time to plant my garden. Probably should have done it a couple weeks ago already, because the last chance for frost, I think, came and went weeks ago. So this material is going to be needed out in the garden. If it has a few worms in it when it goes out into the garden, that's not a problem either. Those worms will just do good out in the garden. We're just going to have to let this wind down and get this material out in the garden. So, alright, so that's it for the day. I'll take care of cleaning all this stuff up after I shut the camera off. So thanks for joining me. And, you know, as usual, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. I always appreciate that. And consider subscribing to my channel. Alright everyone, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye now.